Okay, here we go. I wasn't sure I was going to make a video like this, but some other people made videos like this, and I think I have something to say that other people haven't said. So here's my Stormgate exit interview. For now, I'm not completely writing off Stormgate, but I'm not currently playing it. I'm just going to check in when there are major patches, but I don't have as much faith as I used to. I'm a little more pessimistic on it, and so I'm going to try to explain why. Most of you know who I am. If you don't, when I was really young, rank 1, Red Alert Aftermath, rank 1 Dune 2000, so I was into those Westwood Studios RTSs. Then I got into StarCraft, eventually became competitive in StarCraft, national champion. Then I was the best player outside of Korea. I played inside Korea for a little bit, but it wasn't for me. Lifestyle and everything. So I stopped doing that. Shortly after that, SC2 came out. I was a pro gamer in that, founding member of Team Liquid. But a lot of people are used to hearing me talk from a show called State of the Game, which was created and hosted by JP. And I joined Day 9, Artosis, and In Control, and we talked about StarCraft 2, the competitive scene and the patches and all of that. So, so I think the big thing for me has been the development style of Stormgate. So I'll try not to get too ahead of myself and just go through the slides I prepared, or else I'm going to talk forever. But the first thing I want to do is, as you can see, is go on a tangent about being an armchair dev. So I haven't developed a game. I've known devs, like been good friends with them, some at Blizzard, and had long conversations about developing a game and got an idea of what it's like and issues that come up and everything. But I haven't done it. But I would say in the year 2024, we have seen many people with no experience come up with an idea of how to develop a game, and then even lacking technical experience, use just whatever tools are available to them to make the game, and then it's an extremely successful game. And even if it has an ongoing success, and then it becomes not just lightning in a bottle, but they have to maintain it, they're able to do that. They're able to adapt. And so someone with no dev experience is able to develop a really good game, and then when it becomes a big game, they're still able to continue to develop it. So I'm not saying that I could do that. I'm just saying that I think it's fair for someone who has spent their life playing games, and especially when you're talking about a very narrow scope here. Like, I'm a pro gamer. I've thought about RTS, and specifically StarCraft style RTS game design for decades now, and so this is something I think I would know a lot about. And I would also say it's not like a lot of studios have been trying to make StarCraft 3 or a copy of StarCraft. Like, most of the other RTSs that come out are doing their own thing. They're not trying to copy StarCraft. So Stormgate is one that has been, they're basically trying to make a kind of like StarCraft 3. It's in the lineage of StarCraft, whatever you want to call it. But it's the most like StarCraft, right? And so it's not like there's a blueprint on how to do that. It's not like experienced game devs are going to be like, oh yeah, I know. I could tell you from my experience exactly how the right way to go about making StarCraft 3. Not only StarCraft 3, because we'll get into that, because that's the next thing where I'm going to talk about on the slide. It's not StarCraft 3, right? So it's not a sequel. They're trying to make a StarCraft-like game, but everything is original, right? Of course, a lot of people look at Stormgate and they say, that's Terran, that's Zerg, that's Protoss, whatever. Which I don't agree. If you actually play the game and learn the races, then they're not Terran, Zerg, and Protoss, but there are a lot of similarities too, right? So anyway, let's look at StarCraft 2. When they were making StarCraft 2, or when they started making it, those devs, I think, were having this crazy experience of, okay, we made a game. It's very popular. People love the campaign and people love the multiplayer, right? And the way people are playing the multiplayer, and we're talking about like early 2000s, is they're doing things we never imagined they would do with our game, right? When we were designing the way the economy worked in StarCraft, we weren't transferring workers from our main base to our expansion, right? There's a guy named Maynard, I think, who is credited with inventing that. My memory is awful, so if I get the history wrong, but it's called Maynarding your workers, because this is a guy who would build like 30 SCVs on one base, and then I think one day he's like, oh, I have another base. Maybe I should send some of them to mine over there. And then it's like, oh my God, did anyone ever think of like, charting out how the minerals per minute you get based on how many workers you have and what's the optimal distribution of workers, and and then you start min-maxing the economy of StarCraft. It's like the game didn't start like that. People just made an expansion and then started making workers at that expansion. They didn't transfer workers. And so that's like one example of just, a crazy difference between how people were playing it and then how they ended up playing it, right? So when they're making StarCraft 2, they must be thinking, we're going to make a game and we don't really know how they're going to play it. We can try to predict it a little better than we did with StarCraft 1. But for the most part, we got to just make a game and put it in their hands and then see what it is when we put it in their hands. And then, because it was a sequel, it's like the scope was limited compared to Stormgate in some ways, because they're going to reuse units, they're going to reuse race mechanics, and then the advancements of the game. So if Stormgate's supposed to be a next-gen RTS or whatever, it has to come up with its own ways that it's, superior to StarCraft 2, right? Because it's coming out 14 years later. And so StarCraft 2, when that was the next-gen thing, well, the graphics changed a lot, but I think for the gameplay, you look at multiple building selection. I think it was, mostly focused on user friendliness. So MBS is multiple building selection. In StarCraft 1, you can only select one building at a time. And then UUS is unlimited unit selection, right? So you can select as many units as you want, not just 12 at a time. Pathfinding is way better in StarCraft 2, so it feels a lot nicer, more predictable, it flows better, whatever. StarCraft 1 is famously like clunky and hard to intuitively understand what you're supposed to tell the units to do to actually get them to do what you want them to do, right? And then auto mining was another big thing where in StarCraft 1, if you rally workers to a mineral patch, they don't mine from that mineral patch. Every time a worker builds, you have to go there and tell that guy to mine. StarCraft 2, they will auto mine. Okay, so those were like they had an idea of the things that were going to be very different to play about StarCraft 2 than was StarCraft 1, and that was figured out, and that they had that. Stormgate has to like come up with that stuff on their own, so they have some stuff like that with the quick build, whatever. But I just don't think it's as revolutionary now. It's hard to be revolutionary now, right? But look, when they were developing StarCraft 2, that was before MOBAs were out, right? Warcraft 3, I don't know where on the timeline, Dota was a custom map on Warcraft 3, but if we're talking about like, it's not like it was such a big thing that the StarCraft 2 devs were like, oh, we should look at some of these Dota units in this custom map in Warcraft 3 and see if those are some interesting mechanics that we should integrate. But now we have probably like 1,000 heroes from all the different MOBAs that are out, where you can take inspiration for how things feel to control, what kind of abilities are out there, what kind of interactions you can have, what kind of mechanics you can have. Like, I think the MOBAs, all of those mechanics and feels of how to control these things, all of that can apply to an RTS, and I think you can take inspiration from all that. And then so that's just unit inspiration, I think, and like gameplay, action, fighting, micro inspiration, right? And then we learned a lot from StarCraft 2, right? So when they were making StarCraft 2, that's all they had was Brood War, right? and then, like I said, that when they made Brood War and what ended up being were two totally different things. Now you've got people like me, but I'm not unique. There are a lot of people like me who deeply understand the way StarCraft 1 economy works, deeply understand the way StarCraft 2 economy works, and can compare the two and see which one's better, what's good about this, what's good about that. And then not only can you do that with 1 and 2, but you have these 3 expansions of StarCraft 2. You have Wings of Liberty, where we started, then Heart of the Storm, and then Legacy of the Void. And those are 3 very different games. And, looking back, Wings of Liberty, very flawed version of StarCraft 2. And Heart of the Storm, very flawed version too. Like, a lot of problematic eras back then. And I think Legacy of the Void, in my opinion, clearly the very best version of StarCraft 2, but also has its issues, like Protoss not doing as well in tournaments, but doing really well on ladder, and all of that. But a lot of lessons to learn from all of that. And some of the people at Frost Giant Studios were the ones working on StarCraft 2, right? So you can say, oh well, they were making it. What do you mean? Of course they know all that stuff. I just don't think they do, because when we're talking about the competitive 1v1, you have to actually understand playing the game at a high level. And I don't get the feeling that, top to bottom at Frost Giant Studios, there are enough people that understand competitive 1v1 at a really high level and actually could like keep up in a conversation on all these things with, a handful of people from Team Liquid that like have posted on the forums, right? And so that's like troubling to me. I don't know if they have enough of that. You look at Zero Space, and they have, when they make a change and they play test it internally, they have people that can actually do useful play testing internally, right? I don't think Frost Giant has actual useful competitive 1v1 playtesting internally. And then here's the other question on the development style. If I recall correctly from an interview, they said the first year Frost Giant Studios was in existence, they were just like brainstorming, doing theoretical discussions and all this stuff. And that if you were following the game from the beginning, you remember them putting out all these questionnaires to the community, like, what do you like in an RTS? Do you want heroes? Do you not want heroes? Do you want creeps? Do you not want creeps? All this stuff. Which to me in the first place, that was troubling, because I'm like, how do you not, how have you lived all these years and not come up with your own good idea for like a StarCraft style RTS? Like, how do you not already have, jotted down on a napkin, like, if I could start StarCraft 2 over from scratch, like this is the way to do it. Like some kind of good idea of like, I don't know. It's actually like a red flag to me how open they were and how open they seem to be to like making an RTS of like any type, or could have all this stuff or whatever. It's like, shouldn't you already have a blueprint? Like I think, and I talk about armchair devs, like someone before they found their studio, like if they weren't a dev before and they got inspired to make a game, it's because they already have like this good idea, this blueprint of how to develop a good game before the studio is even founded, right? And I don't know about that. I feel like they just thought, we'll put together a studio of good devs and then we'll figure out what kind of game is the people want and then we'll make it. I don't know. And then in the second year of their existence, in the interview, they said they built a prototype to get like proof of concept type of work done, before they actually started building the Stormgate. I assume the Stormgate engine was being developed simultaneously, but they built some other another prototype to do some proof of concept work on the stuff that they figured out in their first year of their existence. What did they figure out? What was the upshot design wise on the competitive 1v1 of the first 2 years of their existence? I don't know. I don't see anything that I'm like, wow, like they've thought deeply about this and they've solved this. Maybe, I think it's still there's still a lot of their design that they haven't implemented yet. I know that for a fact, right? We can get, I think it's problematic that the game is in this state and early access. Like I feel like the design should be there, and that's in a later slide. But like, I haven't seen the genius yet. If there's a bourgeois level game dev at Frost Giant Studios, like, I think people put God, what's his name, Ice Frog, the Dota guy. There's some like real true rock star bourgeois level game devs, and then there are like some GM level game devs that it's like, oh, this is a great team to have, and then there are just game devs that it's like, okay, yeah, they've kept the job, but like, are they really the ones like creating having the genius ideas and implementations and creating the next level stuff? I haven't seen the bourgeois level dev work in the game yet. So I think that's weird, and like I think it should be here I think I should have seen it by now, but I don't feel like I've seen it. And then, are we sure the community suggestions were even good? Like I don't know. Like the thing that they decided to make, I don't know that we know that we're even on the right path, right? So of course it's not like there was a poll and it's like, oh, the highest option is like, we do want creeps. It's like, okay, we'll give you creeps. I'm sure they deeply discussed all of this stuff. I just don't know that after all of that deep discussion that they ended up with the formula for the game that was better than drawing things out of a hat and just being like, okay, this is what we have. These are our like constraints, and now we're just going to make the best game we have. Because so far, the way that all the stuff in Stormgate is coming together, I don't see the genius of it, right? I don't see it. I don't see how this mixture of things is like the next StarCraft, right? Okay, so here, this slide, aspects of Stormgate I don't understand. I could make this way more negative and just start like criticizing, but as I said, not everything is implemented yet, and I'm just gonna say I don't understand this stuff, and this is like ways that I don't see the game coming together. And some of you may have watched on Artosis's channel. I went on his channel on YouTube. We had a discussion on the micro, and so this is kind of similar to that of like, I don't really get it right now. So if we're incentivized to creep, why don't we have an insanely strong defender's advantage in early game? Or if it's not a like gameplay thing, at least with defensible map terrain, because we have maps that are just wide open. And so if that's not an extremely obvious point to you, I'll rephrase it. So say you had a game like Eras of StarCraft 2, where the defender's advantage was so strong that no one ever attacked. And then all it was in the end, it was either like a stalemate where you really never attacked, or it was just like both players build up an army, you have one big fight, and then whoever wins that fight wins the game. So how would you solve that? And I think having juicy map objectives, which it wouldn't have to just be creeps, but creeps is one way of doing it, then that could be a solution of like, let's get some action going. You basically have to be out on the map. If you just let your opponent be out on the map and you don't contest that at all, then you're almost certainly going to lose the game because those map objectives are so valuable, right? Okay. So I like that. I like the idea of creeps. Let's force people out on the map to some extent, right? But I think that goes with a very strong defender's advantage, or like the stakes shouldn't be that high when you're out on the map. Like if you go out on the map and you try to contest and slow down their creeping, and you only slow it down a little bit, you get a little bit of value. You take some of the creeps on your side of the map, and then you contest the creeps in the middle or whatever. You lose that fight, so now you're down units, and they get that creep camp that you were fighting over. Okay, that can't be such a big deal that you lose the game. But it has been. Sorry, I know when I exhale a lot of air, that's probably awful in the mic. Sorry, I'll try to stop. But that has been the case in Stormgate, and it just hasn't made a lot of sense. Builds that are the equivalent of 4 pooling in StarCraft 1, which is just you immediately build a spawning pool, then you immediately make Zerglings, and you immediately attack. It's the fastest, strongest attack you can do, like, early in the game. Those types of things have existed in Stormgate. There's no design like resisting the existence of those things, or like making those kinds of things impossible or unviable. They're totally viable. They have been totally viable repeatedly on several different builds of the game. And at this point, I don't think it's like accidental. I think this is like Stormgate is designed in a way that allows this stuff to happen or to be possible when it should be very unlikely, right? And then on the other side, if you say, okay, well, we're not 4 pooling, but I would say in StarCraft 2, in Wings of Liberty, when the game first came out, and its whole life really, but it was worse at the start, 4 gate with Protoss, where you stay on one base and you make as many gateways as you can afford to produce units from on one base, and then you just all in on one base. Stormgate has also had builds like that. And so 4 pooling and 4 gating, whether it's the earliest attack you can do, whether it's a little bit delayed because you saturate one base, but you never plan to expand, and then you all in. Both of those things have been very strong in various matchups in Stormgate on various builds. And I don't think it's like, oopsie, I think there's a way that you design the game where occurrences of that become very unlikely if you don't want that kind of gameplay in your game, right? But they haven't. Like, so every time there's a patch and a build like that is really strong, I'm just like, you know, this is inherent to the design of the game. And so it's going to repeatedly be a problem until you have a different like redesign of how the early game works. Okay. All right. So that's something I don't understand about the early game. I understand why it's designed in certain ways, but it just seems like a really rough first draft of like, all right, we're not really going to try to solve a lot of this stuff theoretically. We're just going to throw something together and then start iterating to fix it. And I feel like at this point, after this long, for these people to be thinking about what the 1v1 is going to play like, it just should be better, but I don't like where it's at right now. All right. So forget about that. Where are the StarCraft style flashy and fun to control units? So that's what I talked a lot about with Artosis, that the game is more tactical and about like setup and positioning than it is about like flashy, impactful micro, right? And so, you know, even Warcraft 3, which has the higher time to kill, has some of the flashy, impactful micro. So you don't necessarily, it's not exactly about time to kill, but it's also just about the way the units control and the way that you get the maximum value out of them, and what kind of things you are doing to get the like what's the optimal micro in this situation, what kind of move is that, and or what's the optimal way to take this fight. And for Stormgate, to me, the way the individual units are designed, and then the way the units are designed like as a kit, when you get all the units that a faction has and see how their synergy is, it's just not as like exciting and fun to control for me. And I go back to, you have 1,000 MOBA heroes to be inspired from, and it's been 14 years since StarCraft 2 came out. Well, new units were added in Heart of the Storm and Legacy of the Void, but like, you know, there's been a lot of time to think about what's a cool StarCraft unit that hasn't been invented yet. And I'm not going to go through every single unit in Stormgate. Most of them are not things that I'm really excited to control. And people talk about, you know, you get the animations, you get the sounds, you get it more visceral, and that'll definitely help. But I still think there's fundamentally something about the gameplay, the way these units work, and the way that battles are won and lost, that is really different. And so again, I don't understand. Are they purposely trying to make Stormgate more tactical in positioning than about action? I don't know. Next point, what is the Stormgate economy? Touched on a little bit that there's a vast amount of knowledge about StarCraft 1 economy, about StarCraft 2 economy, and then people thinking about what's a good economy for the RTS, and if you want your RTS to play this way, then how should the economy work and stuff. Now I think there is a lot of knowledge on the Frost Giant Studios team about this. I'm not saying they're like completely ignorant of all of this. I still question how many of the people have a very, very, very high knowledge of this, especially when we're talking about pro gamer level competitive 1v1. But I still don't know what they're aiming for. Like that's the bigger problem, is I don't know what they're trying to do, right? And so like me as a playtester, I was giving a lot of feedback and putting a lot of effort into giving feedback. And at this point, it's just become so frustrating of like, how much of the feedback am I giving is on placeholder stuff that like there's no point in even giving feedback on it because it's placeholder, and how much of their unimplemented designs are going to totally, negate the feedback that I'm giving. That my feedback is going to become useless once something else is implemented, right? And completely change it. But it's like, I don't even know where they're headed, what they're trying to do. I don't know, what they want optimal economic play to look like in their game. And, they're just these wild swings with like, with how much resources the creeps reward that like massively change the way the game was played. And when there's such a wild swing like that, and something like, I don't know, I viewed the normal economy should be more like the foundation of the game, and the creeps are just more of like a sprinkling that are just valuable enough to get you out on the map kind of thing. So anyway, yeah, I don't know what the Stormgate economy is supposed to be. And so last point, not gameplay related, but why on the tech side of things, we've heard tick rate, rollback, I don't know what else. Those were the two big things. Of like, we're gonna have such a high tick rate that's never been done before, and then we're gonna have rollback for RTS. It's gonna be amazing, and all this stuff. And personally, I would almost 20 years ago, I was perfectly content with playing StarCraft 1 the way it was back then, and people still are. And not that it shouldn't be improved from StarCraft 1. I definitely think that's you can be content with it and used to it, but it would be better, and you should be making it better for new games. But to me, the biggest issue with StarCraft 2 and just with RTS in general is how many frames per second can you get, right? And so right now the game should not be optimized for frames per second, right? Because they need to implement everything they're going to implement, and then it is more efficient to do that and then optimize more toward the end once everything's in, right? I understand at least that much about game dev, and so I'm not totally criticizing that, but what I'm saying is my understanding is some of this stuff that they're implementing, well, my take on it is that I don't know that it's totally necessary, that it's like overkill. And my understanding is that some of it could even cost frames per second. And that's like really, like, you shouldn't be doing anything that probably has like very little return or actual real value, but is more of like just like a buzzword and like promotional thing than an actual improvement to your game. If it then like actually lowers some people's frames per second. And so they've made all these claims on the tech side of things for the game. They've never, ever, that I ever saw in any interview or anything, made any claim on this being an RTS where you can get very high frames per second relative to other RTS. Like Never, ever. And to me, that's like by far the most important issue. And it is an issue right now. Just for the testing, like a lot of people don't have a smooth gameplay experience playing the game right now. And, we expect that to improve when they eventually really focus on that. But people are rightfully worried about custom games where you might be getting thousands of units, about 3v3s, and even just the smoothness of playing Max Army versus Max Army in 1v1 is a legit issue for people. And I'm just like, I don't know. I think that all that's very weird. If you were the RTS that was like, here, a normal computer can get 200 frames and a high-end computer can get 400 frames, and it's like, let us enjoy the buttery smoothness of that, which other other esports are enjoying with their 480 hertz monitors and 500 plus frame rates. That'd be something. And then I don't know. So that's weird to me too. Okay, so things that I like about Stormgate, I felt like I should at least put something that I think they've cooked up some great things. I think the macro mechanics are really good. Ideas like the sentry post, which is like the bunker. You put a different unit, it plays a different role, right? That's cool. The boosting with solar habitats, and then overcharging bobs and power building. Celestials can surge their buildings, and that has a various amount of effects. And then high power, medium power, and low power mechanic for Celestial I like. At least it's a good idea. Morph core as an alternative to normal building is again a cool idea. It's like, I'm gonna build this building eventually. Am I gonna build it normally, or is it gonna come from a morph core? So there's a lot of someone who likes to tinker with builds has a lot to work with, I think, and so that's very cool. I don't see anything from Infernal here. I don't know. I don't know about Infernal. And then I think like seeds have been planted for late game to be dynamic. They've cooked up some ideas for harass units for movement. The Aeon Gate is something almost no one's built, but it's like a Nidus Canal for the Celestials and stuff like that. Not going to get into all of it, but I do think they have a little bit of a vision for like a pretty cool late game. But like it'd be a very high skill level to really play all that stuff and enjoy it. Like to use all the tools at your disposal in a optimal and satisfying way. And that's going to be like basically for pro gamers only. And so, I mean, it would be good to watch as an esport, and it'd be fun for the pro gamers. But if a lot of the like coolest part of the game is this end game that's unplayable for most people, then that's not good. Anyway, seeds have been planted for good ongoing map variety. Like StarCraft 2 maps have been very boring. StarCraft 1 maps, they've gotten extremely creative with StarCraft 1 maps. Some people don't like how some of the crazier StarCraft 1 maps, but I think at least with the existence of creeps and kind of the way creeps are designed now, and with the destructible trees and everything, if you get some really, really talented map makers, theoretically, if this was a big esport and we had a lot of talented map makers get interested, I think they would, with those things being like fundamental parts of the game, they would come up with some really cool designs and keep the game fresh by, this map you have a speed camp, but you don't have a second Therium or whatever, and it's like, okay, now I got to play like. I think there's a lot of potential there. But just talk about the maps right now. I mean, I think it's awful how much map variety there is right now. I think they need one standard map that the main base has a small ramp. Like, they should just copy a StarCraft 2 map right now. Like, main base has a small ramp, and then you go down, your natural is right there, and then there's a choke, and then there's a third that's somewhat protected but not as protected, and then your fourth is more wide open, and like that. Like, I think that's what the game needs right now is, and so the maps have been very frustrating to me too. All right, let's yap about EA. So I don't understand that. Like, if they always knew that they were going to do EA, like that was their plan of how they were going to develop this game, right? So they needed to have a better plan of what EA was going to be. I think, like, right now, um, it's just kind of a mess. Like, I think the scope is too wide. There isn't, someone sits down and plays. I don't think there's like a really good experience of like, here's like, we know what's fun about RTS. Here it is. Try it out, experience it, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, this is it. And then it's like, and then you're hooked. Even if the scope is very narrow, and then you're like, and they're like, okay, we'll get to the rest later. Um, like they need that, but right now it's such a mess. Like you can start queuing, and then it's like just dog versus dog every game, and it's like, wait, you don't even know. I don't know. Well, the last thing I'm going to do, and you can stop the video before I do it, is I'm going to say how I would have gone about developing the competitive 1v1 for this game. Um, but I just, like, it just doesn't seem very well established and very intuitive, what your first experience is. And there's no like, oh, you build this unit and this unit, and these are fun to control. Can't you feel like this one has this ability and you do this and you get some like extra synergy and value out of this? This is the optimal way to micro it. You can see how you're getting more value when you do this ability and you position like this and you do that. And now you go fight the other factions early game units, and they're, totally different, but it's a fair fight, and they're chasing you, you're trying to kite them, or they're trying to get a surround and you're trying to use terrain to prevent a surround. Like basic RTS interactions with units that feel good to control, and you know what you're supposed to be doing. It's clear what the unit role is and all that kind of stuff. And then you just need a little taste of like, hey, we know how to design an RTS interaction that is good. Here it is. And then build off of that, right? And that's not at all what early access has been. There's been a lot of very like degenerate gameplay in early access. So if you compare this to like Battle Aces, they have a way more narrow scope. When you play the game, it's very clear what the game is about, what it's supposed to be doing. Like, you put together your deck, and then you build units, and then you see what your opponent's doing, you try to build the counter units, you try to get the right blend of units, and then you micro and you fight, and that's it. And then after, if you're like, oh, my deck seemed flawed, it's not going to be good against this, let me switch this for that, and that kind of thing. And that's the whole game, and you instantly understand it. And like, I think that's a way better situation, right? So for me, for Stormgate, what early access should have been, ideally, is have the opening build orders and low-tech unit interactions figured out, have the creeps figured out, and have at least a 2 base economy in working order. So like, you gotta have something that makes sense of like, show people. We'll get more into it later on how I would have developed it, but like, there has to be some kind of like solid foundation from which you're building up, starting from the early game and then building up from there, right? And so I think with the creeps being a big draw of this game, especially for StarCraft players, of like, oh, let's play StarCraft now, but with creeps, and how is that all going to work? And it's like, well, Frostgiant doesn't know how it's going to work. I don't think, at least they haven't shown us that they know how it's going to work. And so I think you need to have that. And so there have been, for some of the builds, so I've played several of the like closed testing builds, and then I've played early access, and then the patches that have been in early access. So I've played a bunch of patches of Stormgate now. Some of the matchups on some of the builds have been good. It's had this, okay? I've liked it. And then what they used to do is you could only play one map at a time. They would switch the map. And the most fun I had playing Stormgate ever was they switched a map, and I was playing Infernal, and I was like, new map, we got to figure out a new creeping pattern. and then you got to figure out how the other players like to creep, and then how do I adjust my creeping pattern to counter the way that they're creeping, and creep jack, and it was like this explosion of like possibilities and stuff for me to figure out, and it was really fun for me to play and figure that out and tinker, and I had good fights, and it was fun. Okay, but a lot, it's accidental. Like that can happen in Stormgate, but the worst things can happen too, right? And so this stuff is not well established, and like I was talking about earlier, I don't think the game is fundamentally designed in a way to, when you do a balance patch and you tweak a bunch of stuff, is like, and everything falls and the pro gamers get their hands on it and then they try their hardest to win. How many of the builds are now going to be just awful degenerate gameplay of like all ins, or you only build one unit because you never tech, or you never expand, or like all these things. Like the way the game is designed is the chance for degenerate gameplay to be the optimal way to play to win games is high, and the chance that like actual good gameplay is the optimal way to play is low. And that's just what I've seen from Stormgate so far. And I don't even think the root causes for that, I don't think that they are planning to address them. But I don't know if they are. They haven't implemented everything that they've designed and that they intend to do. But I have become pessimistic about it. So that's that. All right. Last point. It should not be so chaotic. You can't just make factions thematically and then iterate on the gameplay until you discover what it is. That's what I feel like they've done. It feels like they've made the factions thematically, and they made the units not even like what's the most fun unit to play and control, but just like almost like they made it based on the lore or something, like based on the theme. They came up with Celestials as, this is going to be a faction that's stronger when they're near their buildings. And Infernal is supposed to be the faction that just floods in so many units, more units than Zerg. It's supposed to have so many units, which, by the way, good luck with your frame rates, but so many units. And then I think the Vanguard is supposed to be the most familiar feeling faction and the most normal faction that's more like flexible and tactical and that kind of thing, right? So I don't know. I think it's weird. I don't know if that's true. I don't want to like put words in their mouth or whatever, right? I don't want to like make up what happened inside their offices, right? I'm just saying that's that's the impression I get, that it's like they didn't make units that they thought would be fun to play, and then they didn't put together a kit for each race in a way that like is actually designed to interact well with the other races. So, I think if this were a game that could be in development for a decade or whatever, or 8 years or whatever, then maybe they could get away with that. It's like, you create those principles first, and then through a lot of iteration internally before you show anyone, you eventually figure out how the gameplay actually works, right? And you make it more fun as you go, and you make it you minimize the chance that playing it competitively will just mean doing like dumb strats, right? But yeah, I think for early access should be, in the worst case scenario, the first draft of your final draft. It really should not be just the first draft of your final draft. It should be a little later draft than your first draft of your final draft. But I don't even know that, a lot of the stuff we're playing is not a draft of the final draft. It's placeholder. It's like, it's not even part of the final draft, right? So I think that's problematic. So I wish they would have made it in a way that we are playing the first draft of the final draft, but it's a smaller part of the game. Like if it's just tier 1 tech, fine. but let's like figure out opening build orders and like early game unit interactions and stuff. Whoops, I didn't mean to do that. It was motion slideshow. Okay. All right. So you want to I'll try to go through this quickly, but you could turn. I'm not going to talk about Stormgate anymore. I'm going to talk about if it was my job to make StarCraft 3, except it's not StarCraft 3. It's not a sequel. I have to like come up with a whole new game that is like StarCraft, right? This is what you have. This is what I think you have to do. This would make sense to me and would hopefully keep my playtesters more sane. First, I would create tier 1 of 2 factions, and I'd have a standard map, like I said, and I'd make the creeps. And I'd balance the openers, the opening build orders, where some people want to fast expand and just play defensively. Some people want to creep. So, like, some people want to make an army, but they want to attack the creeps. And then some people want to make an army to attack their opponent, right? And so those are the 3 basic ways that you can open the game, like philosophically, right? The 3 approaches you want to take. And I don't think every faction should have all 3 of those options against every faction, but you need to figure out which faction is going to be doing what against each faction as kind of the standard, right? And you need to give up some of those possibilities. And then, so I would balance the openers in that way, right? Not everyone can do everything, but it's possible in this game to do any of these things, right? It's just you can't do it with every faction against every faction. All right. So then you balance the units against each other. And this is just basic RTS stuff. Slow melee units beat fast melee units, right? Because the fast melee units get to choose when they get to fight. And so the slow melee units should beat them. But possibly, if it's a lot of small units, then if they get a surround, then possibly they should actually win that too. The slow melee units need to use terrain to trade well. So this is like Zealots against Zerglings, obviously, right? That's how Zealot against Zergling works. Okay, fast melee unit beats ranged if they both micro. Because the fast melee units run in, they surround, and they attack. Or they kind of kite forward as melee units, right? And the range units can't kite away fast enough because they're slower. But if the range units are behind a wall, or they can tuck in against a wall, or they're like in the trees or whatever, so there isn't as much surface area, then they might win against the fast melee units. Range units beat slow melee by kiting, right? They just kite them. The slow melee units are too slow. So some units can kite other units. Now, those are the 3 like basic ways for these like basic RTS units to interact, but you can give them some abilities, right? And these could be top bar abilities. You can give them some abilities and it can make the interactions a little spicier. And the idea of Stormgate of like spawning with a caster unit, like the Hexen for the Infernal, that's kind of interesting too. It's like, that's another way to spice things up. You get one of these guys, you're going to get a few casts, and so you do all that, you figure all this out, and you know what is supposed to beat what, right? Like, you have standards of like, if this guy like just makes this stuff and this guy just makes this stuff and they go fight here, we know who should win. And anytime that's not like it should be figured out, right? I don't think that's figured out for Stormgate. Maybe they have some intentions, but it doesn't seem like it's like each patch really like respects that. Okay, so this is where you start. You just get 2 different factions interacting with each other in the early game in the normal StarCraft RTS ways of different openings are viable, and they have asymmetrical units, right? Their units aren't the same, and then they're balanced in this way of like kind of a circle of counters, right? All right, so what do you do after that? You have 2 factions. You have early, like good, solid early game build orders figured out. The units are interacting well. You create T2. Tier 2. So what are you doing with Tier 2? What's the point of Tier 2 units? Again, this is something I look at the Stormgate Tier 2 units. I'm like, I don't understand exactly what some of this stuff is in there, and some of it I don't understand why they're there. So tier 2 some of the tier 2 must counter the enemy tier 1 units. Okay, if that's not the case, then when you tech up to tier 2, you probably just keep making your tier 1 units, right? If that's not the case. And we've seen that in Stormgate sometimes. So it's like in StarCraft 2, in PvP, you open Stalkers, and then you get an Immortal. Now, Immortals counter the Stalkers, right? That's the general idea. Okay. Some of tier 2 must provide harass options if the tier 1 units are not good at harass. Okay, at this point in a StarCraft style RTS, if you're at tier 2 and you still don't have a way to harass, your game sucks, right? So, sometimes the tier 1 units can harass, like Stalkers can get blink or whatever, or just speedlings running around the map can be a form of harass or whatever, adepts, whatever. You have ways you can harass. And then worst case scenario, tier 2 just gives you a transport. So this unit that used to be awful because it walked slow and it couldn't go up cliffs, now it can go as fast as the transport, it can go up cliffs, and drop micro, as everyone loves drop micro, and there you go. Okay, so that's what you got to do with tier 2. That's it. Like that's why tier 2 exists. Okay. You can also have research locked behind tier 2 for the tier 1 units so that they can stay relevant. So this is like zealots getting charge, right? And then army composition variety is a must. All right. So ideally, it's better to continue to create tier 1 units along with the tier 2 units, but it might not work in every matchup. And it's actually good that some units are useless or have limited use in some matchups. So I think I'll talk about that a little bit more later. But you don't want to get to tier 2 and then only make the tier 2 units, right? We're trying to have you're trying to give each person a kit to play with where there's synergy and it's fun and there's interaction, right? And so if it's a case where you ever just start wanting to build only one unit, then that's problematic, and we've seen that a lot in Stormgate. So we must have army composition variety, but it doesn't mean that you must be making every single unit in every single matchup. Okay, so now that we have the two factions interacting together and they have these counters, they can harass each other, whatever. Now you work on the mirror matchups before you make a third faction. Do not make a third faction. Work on the mirrors, and you might have to lower your expectations a little bit for the mirrors, because mirrors in StarCraft have always been a little bit weird, right? And that's just the way it is. So mirrors may not have good variety in interactions until tier 2, so don't obsess over their tier 1. If you can only really viably make one unit of your, if you have like 3 tier 1 units, or you want to call one of them like tier 1.5 or whatever, right? It's okay if only one of them is viable. You just make that unit, you mirror each other, you're both making that unit, fine. It's mirror matchup. It happens. But when you get to tier 2, you absolutely have to counter. You have to have something that counters that unit. Whatever that chosen unit is, of like, this is the unit that you have to make in the early game, or you're just going to lose the early game so badly that the game is over. That unit has to be countered by the tier 2 tech of that faction, right? And so, it's good that the other units are useless, right? Because this makes it easier to balance. It's good that you don't have so many things going on affecting each other, right? So you have to have that. Stormgate hasn't always had that. Higher tech and research must be great at countering lower tier units and mirrors. Yes. Your army comp must always be evolving, never stuck massing one unit. Yes, we talked about that a lot. Defender's advantage and affordable attacking enable this. Yes. So that's important, but also Stormgate, sometimes the unit just doesn't even exist that counters the tier 1 units. Sometimes that happens too in Stormgate. And so, but it can be very hard to invest in sometimes it's hard to invest in tech and get the tech to pay off so that you can actually like so that the game can evolve, right? And so what you don't want happening, so what you want in a StarCraft-like game is you want there to be some tension where one guy can say, hey, I know you want to tech to the thing that counters my units, but I think I can get you. I think I can all in you. And when you're transitioning to this tech and you've invested some money into it, but it hasn't paid off yet, I'm going to hit you and you're going to have a defender's advantage. So this isn't going to be totally easy for me, right? There's something built into the game to make so that this isn't that easy for me, but the tension is there. The possibility is there. So you're always trying to ride that fine line of like, hey, you know, this guy spent some money on tech, but he has a defender's advantage. And so someone all-inning him, you know, it's going to be close. Let's watch the fight. And if the game has a solid design in general, then a lot of times what can happen is the game's not even over. You know, the attacker can do some damage and then he can tech behind it or whatever, right? And so that's like the best case scenarios where you have a fight, but it's not actually an all-in. The game goes on or whatever. So you have all these interactions, okay? So that's what you want. And I mean, you want that on every matchup, not just mirrors, right? Okay, so you create the third faction. All right, this is the hardest because you multiply the number of matchups. I have the Rubik's Cube analogy in mind. The first time a child sees a Rubik's Cube, unless he's some kind of super genius, he's going to be like, this color, I want it to go over there. And he spins it over there and he's like, oh, wait, now all the other colors that I wanted them where they were, they've all moved. And now let me try to fix it. Now all that moved. And then you make zero progress whatsoever until, you know, you start to study it and learn the algorithms or whatever to actually move the colors the way you want them without messing up everything else, right? When you do the third faction, that's what's going on now, right? Every time you do one thing, it's so much more likely that it's going to mess something up that you've already established, right? And so don't try to make every unit useful in every matchup. That's when this comes into play, because when you have units that you know are useless, then now they can't mess stuff up, okay? So as soon as you know this unit is so useless in this matchup, it's so awful that you can do whatever, you can buff it as much as you want for the other matchup, and it's still going to be useless in this one matchup, right? So now this unit is this valuable tuning knob for this one matchup that you can play with as much as you want and not mess up the other matchups, right? Okay, so that's why you have to have you know, like three units on tier 1 and 3 units on tier. That's why you need multiple units, right? And it's not so that you can make them all. It's so that all these like synergies are possible, but only good against like certain other things. So you use different ones in different matchups. It's great. That's the beauty of asymmetrical StarCraft races, right? Okay, and then long term, a useless unit might someday become useful. You know, you do a million balance patches, or you just Flash comes along and he's like, hey, you guys haven't been building this unit, let me show you this build that you can use this unit that you guys all thought was useless, and I'll actually just beat the best players in the world with it. Okay, so it's so cool in the competitive scene when you have all these useless units and they're lying in wait to become useful for some genius to recognize now, hey, I can use this in this way that's never been used before, and that's like super cool. But okay, that's not a problem now, because you're just trying to design the intentions of your game. Once the game is live, like the ongoing balancing of a live game is different than what we're discussing here, right? So that doesn't undermine what we're doing right now. It's good design to have it that way right now for that reason, later on for that payoff. Okay, so you do a bunch of playtesting without tier 3, and you start planning all the tier 3 units simultaneously, right? Because they're all going to have to interact in a way that you're planning, and there's no way you're going to get it right on the first try. but you have to at least like plan the way you expect things to go, right? So the way, tier one, when we were designing the way all the units have to interact with each other in a balanced way, even though they're all different types of units, you're doing the same thing with the tier three units, okay? Same principles apply going from tier two to tier three. Got to counter the opponent's tier one and tier two army comp. You can also have research for those lower tier units that's locked behind tier three. And then new dynamics for interacting with opponents' units, right? So you can't just the game has to like change the way it's being played now once you get to tier three, because you've got these crazy high-tech tier three units, right? So you've upped the stakes on what's going. So more multitasking, more micro to do, that kind of thing, right? And different kind of micro. So you've layered things on top of each other. So some new principles just for tier three. So the idea of a stat budget, when you're just making an RTS unit randomly in a game to just get it in the ballpark of being balanced with all the other units in the game, you can use a tool like a stat budget of, this unit's going to cost this much, and then it's going to have this much health and it's going to do this much damage. And that should be like, it can be like roughly equal for all the units, right? For tier three, I think you could make a unit that's just very cost effective. So the stat budget, the stats are just like crazy high, right? I wouldn't do that too much for tier two, and definitely not for tier one. But at this point, you must give tools to break stalemates. Giving those tools earlier can actually be bad. And they've kind of existed earlier in StarCraft and StarCraft 2. But I would rather stay away from it if I were making my own game, because siege units meant to counter static defense are generally also very good as defensive units themselves. All right, so if you give those tools too early, then instead of people using them offensively, they're just going to use them defensively. And so unless you design some very clever tools that can only be used offensively, which, to Stormgate's credit, you have like the Seraphim, which has an ability that can disable enemy buildings, right? And so that's cool. That doesn't help you when you're defending. It only helps you when you're attacking. So that's very cool. It's also tier 3 research. So that's also a point in Stormgate's favor. But you also have Hellborn. You have Sabers that are tier 2 tech, and they're these siege units that are slow. They're slow moving and they're slow attacking, and I don't understand them as tier 2. They're boring tier. I don't understand the idea, like why. Again, it's like going all the way back of when I was like, is Stormgate meant to be more like tactical and positioning based than action based? And it's because of stuff like that. You're giving us really slow, long range units at tier 2. So like, what do you expect mid game to be like if you're giving us that? And not only just to one faction of being like, this is what this faction is. So my daughter just woke up, so I'll stop there. But yeah, that's where I'm at, and I hope they do a great job with the game in the future. But it's a very frustrating experience for me to play test it right now and to get feedback on it. And if they really, really believe that this is the way to do it, they still believe in their plan of this is the best way to develop Stormgate long term, then okay, I don't want to participate in it. I'll come back when it's done. I'll come back when it's done. That's I hope they do a good job. Okay.